All right, let me get into InDesign and get to, I'm going to open up the same file, just a different version. All right, so one of the things that I did here with this file is also kind of show one way that different designers kind of help themselves along the way with navigating. If you zoom out and maybe some of your pages look similar, putting notes over on the workspace that doesn't get printed, like here I am zoomed out, but I've got large text on the left, so I know what page is what. That's one of the kind of ways people help themselves along with knowing what content is where. So that's just one of the things that I wanted to point out as a pro tip, so to speak, for navigating InDesign. So we have, we've been using our text frames, having our text flow from one column to the next, and we have the ability to take one text frame and make a few more unique alterations to that one text box. So this is an article, Happy Pi Day. If you're a math nerd, raise your hand and do a little dance and go eat some pie later. So this article is just about a pie eating contest. So I can go to Object Text Frame Options, or this is one of those things that drives me nuts. You would think that because I want to do something with this text box that it might be under type, but it's not, and I always lose where it is. Again, Object Text Frame Options, but that little keyboard shortcut, Command or Control B, is going to be your best friend. So with that said, within this one text box, I can define a number of columns. So instead of making multiple text frames that we've done previously and link them together, I can take this one text frame and make multiple columns. So there's a lovely little preview box down here. And as I increase my number of columns, then within that one text box, the text will reflow. So that could be something that's helpful. I'm going to say OK to this text box. One of the things that we've done previously is potentially, oh, I want to screen a color behind this text box, and I'll have a separate rectangle to put down behind it, and then maybe I'll resize this text box, and that's all fine and good, but now I have two objects that I have to move around. Let me go ahead and undo that so I can get that blue box away. This, I can apply a color to this one text frame. So I'm going to go ahead and do a swatch and put maybe something a little less garish than the 100% cyan. There we go. And with text frame options, I can do something called inset spacing. So here, just by putting the color in the background, it's still butting up to the edge. With text inset, this is going to start to give me a little breathing room around the edge. So I am still working with one object, not potentially, 4 being the blue box and the 3 individual columns. So this could be a way to streamline all of the different items that you have. And that text frame options is handy. There's plenty of other little guys in here to dive into as needed, but these top 2 are the 2 that you're going to be using pretty much all the time. I'm going to use another example to do vertical justification. So I'm just going to say OK and move over here to the right. We've got this little quote. You may know that it might be from one of your projects. And I've taken a few screenshots and we're going to use those real examples to solve some of our challenges. So this guy, in InDesign, our text always starts at the top left. And we have this as a center aligned object. But maybe what we want to do is we want this text to be in the center, of vertically. There we go. So yeah, I could try to visually get it vertically aligned, and that's not quite it. But mathematically, there we go, getting the text frame options box back, we have vertical justification. So its default is always at the top. And this, if I choose center, will put that in the center of the box. So we don't have to eyeball it. We don't have to do the math on it. I just want that entire piece of text to be in the center of that blue box. So that's another thing that we can do for those text frame options. And okay. All right. All right, I'm going back to my text here. So as I mentioned, this is an article and I have a headline. And again, working with this concept of fewer objects and fewer things to group or move around as your layout might change, we can take this headline and make it work like a typical headline. And this is something called spanning columns. So over here, I've got my cursor highlighting that text over at the top, and I've got the paragraph options selected here, type tool selected, paragraph options all the way at the right. There is this nondescript little section that just says none, but the tooltip, it has columns and then it has a bar that basically spans all of the columns. And that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell that piece of type that I have highlighted to span all of the columns. And so now that piece of type is going across multiple columns. We can go ahead and increase that type size to actually look like a headline, and all of that text does continue to span. So that is one of those little tricks to keep all of your objects down and still have your content together that you can move in together easily. So visually speaking, I could do a hard return after lockdowns to get a little bit of space. One of those other pieces of the puzzle here in the in these formatting options is spacing. Back to that paragraph box. In this section here, and we're going to look at a few of these different options today, there are spacing options. We have space above and space below, and we can go ahead and increase that. So instead of a hard return, which is going to be, based on the text size of the paragraph, I can make a specific size for how much space is going to be below that headline. All right, so that's some information about spanning columns, text frame options. We've got one text box that has a color behind it and an inset. All right, I'm going to go to my next page, which has a little bit more on this same article. We have in some of our publications some widows and orphans, which may not be the end of the world, but visually speaking, we want to stay away from this. So a widow is a small word or two words that hang out alone and they make the space on our page look funny. So a widow is at the end of the paragraph. These two little guys are widows. And an orphan is one very small bit plus of a line of text flowing to the next column. So we can do a few things to get rid of those, and one of them is tracking. One of them is nudging the length of your columns, and that helps more for orphans, but tracking is one of those things that we can do fairly quickly to bring those words together. So tracking is listed under the text options, and we have this section here, which looks like a V and an A, either pulling apart or getting closer. And so for this, I'm just going to go down -10, and that brought all of those lines together. And it might have helped getting one word up from that orphan that we had. So again, I'm selecting all of the text in this paragraph. And one of those ways to select all of the text, you can of course click and drag, but we could also put our cursor in a paragraph. A double click, oh, there we go. Double click selects one word, triple click, hey, there we go, where's my mouse? Triple click selects a line, and 4 clicks selects the entire paragraph. So that's one of those handy options too. So getting my paragraph selected and bringing down the tracking. At most, I recommend only -40. That is really going to make those words look really tight. So 10 works, and it goes in 10 increments, or 25 increments for some, depending on the specific one. But of course, you can certainly type in like -8 to see if that works, and it does. -5, that does. The less, the better. -2, that doesn't do it. All right, that's our limit. We're going to go with -5. All right, so now we just have that one. It's now, it's still an orphan because it's hanging out alone at the top of another column. This guy should be fairly easy with the tracking. We don't have to manage our columns here. Oh, he needs a little bit more than -10. There we go, -20. Now, at this point, we might have to, I'm going to move that circle, deal with this space, and we could, add a or remove a break to get that lined up, and that looks a little better. All right. So that is a little bit more about widows and orphans. Well, I will be looking out for those in the next edition of your newsletter. Keeping all of that content looking neat, clean, tidy. All right, any questions about those two so far? Excellent. I'm just gonna make sure that we're all muted. Okay. All right, so back to InDesign. So here's one of the pieces of the puzzle that we had for our most recent edition of our newsletter. And when we have a call out like this, we want to stay away from too many hyphens. This can get a little visually unappealing or a little overwhelming to the reader. And with it being center aligned, it's even more noticeable. So hyphenation is really easy to remove. With my cursor in that paragraph, with the text tool, making sure that I'm on that paragraph formatting options, we have a little checkbox here. Check, it adds the hyphens. Uncheck, it has no hyphens. So in typical text, in body copy, hyphens aren't a bad thing, certainly not. But when you're doing larger callouts like this, where you're highlighting the text, it just visually isn't as pleasing. So that's one way to help that center aligning. So an easy checkbox there to remove that. So a note about center aligning. I feel as someone teaching InDesign, I wish students had no option to center align. For typographic reasons, center aligning is really hard for our users to read. We need to give our readers a little bit of help when center aligning. We are so programmed to know when a line ends and to go all the way back to the left to start the next line. And with center aligning, when we're not going all the way left and there's an unevenness to where that next line starts, it slows down the process of getting the user the information that we want. So I really encourage you to minimize the amount of center aligning that you do to help your readers out. So it can be something elegantly done in something like an invitation, like this one over here, oops, on the right-hand side. Let me move that palette there. So here's an invitation that has some center alignment. So it's minimal content that we're aligning. It's a little bit more of an elegant effect. So there's little text. We're helping the user out by increasing the leading here. And we have more increased type size. Oh, that's weird. Sorry, got a little weird notification about my laptop. I think we're good. So it has minimal content. We're not asking our users to dig deep. It can work for a list like this one we have over here on the left. That's a good use of that list and center aligning. And with the quote that we had here, we've turned off that hyphenation, we've increased the leading, and that and increased the width of the text box. And so that helps bring this a little bit more, I should say it brings more elegance to this copy here a little bit more. So something to keep in mind as we center align and use that option. Remember, very sparingly, I don't want to slap anyone on the wrist. So here's an example where we've got some center aligning, and this is for a table of contents. So I'm gonna put this guy, the question out to you guys. What could we better do in this circumstance for this table of contents? We've got an orphan, two actually.
Would it be better to do it as like a list item and then work on tracking and maybe for like the ones where you have the orphans, maybe get it so that you have more text down at the bottom so you have 3 rows instead of 2 and just a word?
Yes, that is absolutely a start. So we could work on tracking. Great. I think also this table of contents could be more narrow. What would that do to the text?
Bring it tighter together?
Yes. So potentially making it less wide, more narrow. The text would wrap a little bit better here. Bringing a couple words down onto the next line. So that is an option there. I'm going to, no, I want to show you guys something, but I don't want to use placeholder text. Let me grab another text box. Okay, so this is the next page. You know what? Okay, let me come back to that. I want to go to the next page here. So this might help us answer this question. So this is a caption of a picture. And here's what that looked like laid out. So this bottom one where it says left colon, this actually works really well because we've got the items that are in parentheses on a separate line, whereas above it, we don't. And so there's something called a soft return. So I could hit return in the right place, or returns can be a little funny when you just throw them in because they have different formatting. You can format your paragraphs differently with paragraph styles or just different options. But a soft return, which is shift enter, which visually to us looks the same, but it is taking on the attributes to the paragraph that it was previously with. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a different way. I'm going to go to Type, Show Hidden Characters. And so any type of keyboard stroke that we have, a space, a return, a soft return, all of those are indicated with a mark. So a space is a little dot. A hard return is a paragraph icon that we're kind of used to in writing. And a soft return is this bar or backwards L kind of shape. So this is kind of indicating that all of these pieces are a family still, but visually they go together, and visually and stylistically they go together. So that could be an option. Let me go back up to this page and back to our image here. So if our flow of our lines doesn't fit as well as we'd like, we can add a soft return to get that content on a different line. So this option here on the table of contents on page 3, a soft return would be an awesome option, maybe right here between the weekend and is, and that would flow that text to that next line. So we've got a couple options to help this along. Maybe it's not left aligned. Maybe the width of this box is a little bit more narrow. Maybe this is if it's a 3-column layout, it could be 1 column wide. We could potentially throw some soft returns in there so that it fits a little better. We could turn off our hyphenation. So those are some things that we can help the center align. If we're married to it, if it has to be done, those are some ways that we can help that. Awesome, thank you. Okay. So we took a look at the soft return, and I feel like this is just a better use of that space. Is this going to be the same width there, but it's just a little bit better to help our readers out with taking in that text since we're choosing that right alignment. All right. So the next one on our list is hanging punctuation, and there are 2 different ways to do this, and either are fine, and we'll see what might work better for the situation that you're designing for. So this one is going to be a basic indent. So what is hanging punctuation? Well, our text should be what's aligned, and in this situation, the text is actually not aligned. Our text is offset by the quotation mark. And for whatever reason, like people on the evening news, when they're doing graphics, are getting away from hanging punctuation, and it drives me nuts. So while I love NBC Nightly News, they know how to drive me bonkers by not doing hanging punctuation. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to grab my text tool, and I'm going to put my cursor inside this paragraph, and I'm going to go ahead and indent all of the content. So I'm at that paragraph styles, indenting all of the content, and then outdenting, how about that, everything but that first line. So now I can see that, okay, it's that W is so close. There we go. It's not the exact same measurements, but we can visually line up this text. And now we have our punctuation, that open quote, feeling a lot better. And I'm going to hit the W on my keyboard so we can see that without all of the columns and grids and margins. So I can see now that our text is aligned, but our punctuation is hanging out where it should be. Turning back on the W, the box hasn't moved. And I had this guide here to show us that everything is kind of moving off away from the guide. So if you are using columns, maybe you would just want to move that text box over to align with that column. And that guy, he can hang out there, that's fine. But now that's a little bit more visually pleasing. This is also going to be something that I'll look out for. Either way that you do this is fine with that final option, but this is just going to make our piece look a little bit more professional. All right, so that second type of hanging punctuation. So I did a indent for the last one. This time I'm just going to go ahead and highlight the text box. I don't have to be on my type tool. And I'm going to go up to type and then scroll down to story. There it is. And so this little guy, I think, is generally annoying because it's not called something that we would think of. So sometimes you just have to, go to Google and say, I'm looking for the box for hanging punctuation in InDesign. It sometimes is elusive, just to keep in mind. So this type box is highlighted, and I'm going to click optical margin alignment, and it's going to automatically do hanging punctuation. Now, it's not quite perfect, and that's because this type size here has to match, or should match, the type size of the text that I'm using. So I am going to switch to my type tool and double check the size of my type, 24 points. So I'll change that here, and that'll kind of help rewrap. It's not as perfect as that previous example. Zooming in, the W isn't lined up with the S, and that may or may not drive you a little nuts. This is something like if you're doing a lot of body copy and formatting that, this is an easy help. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. But you can see that what it did was move just the punctuation over versus the entire text. So if I jump back to that previous page, my text box needed to be moved to be aligned with that blue guide, whereas here, the text box I don't have to move. So it's one of those things that you just have to kind of take in stride with the situation that you're designing for. If we're doing a billboard, this is the way that I'd go for up here with the indent, because that's going to be a little bit more control. But if I'm doing a multiple page document, 100 pages or so, I'm going to hit the easy button and let it do it for me. And then I'd go back and double check to see if there was some odd circumstance that the algorithm skipped. So something to think about for those two different options. Okay. Any questions about hanging punctuation? All right, so keeping on with indenting, we're going to take a look at a couple options for potential bullet points. InDesign has an easy built-in way to do bullet points. And I'm going to show that to you with this content over on the left here. So highlighting the text with my text tool, going back over to that paragraph editing section, and that's going to be right here. So if you need to do regular bullets, it can do that for you. If you need numbered bullets, it can do that for you too. If you want to make your bullet points a little bit more customized to the content, you can certainly do that. And so that's what I'm going to show you on this right-hand version of our list. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. And I'm going to go ahead and insert my cursor right in front of my first bullet option. So in each typeface, there are many options that we don't see, and those are called glyphs. And to look at all of those options, I can go to Type and Glyphs. So maybe I want something a little bit more exciting than a bullet point, and I'm going to expand this a little bit more. We have some Greek symbols. We have some more Greek symbols. We've got any type of, potential accent that we need with our writing. If somebody has a last name where they like to use the umlauts, boom, there it is. So these are called glyphs. They're not related to anything that's on our keyboard, but a type designer can choose to add all sorts of options. Not every typeface does, but it's really nice when they do. And so here's this section here for this particular typeface, and I'm on Minion, and I've got some fun little doodads, little illustrations that could be bullet points based on what I'm getting across with my typeface. If I put my cursor here and go to a different typeface, let's go. I don't know, this is kind of a shot in the dark. Like I said, each typeface is going to have a different set of glyphs. It depends on how much work the type designer wants to put in. See here, we don't have too many. We've got a basic bullet point. Not thrilling. Something to think about as you start to go down that path with adding your own bullet points. Let's see, let's go back to, we want to have a check because we've got a list here. We're checking off certain items. All right, so glyphs. Now, getting into the nitty-gritty here of this particular list, I'm going to close that glyphs box. What's happening here is that we have this list item that's really long, and he comes down and goes to this next line and starts all the way at the left. Whereas if we have proper indent formatting, we can see this same item on the left-hand side has that space. So the way that we would format this, if we really want to have specific fun bullet points that are glyphs, we would go back and kind of do the opposite of what we did with our hanging punctuation. And we'd want to indent, and then it could be one of those things that you need to kind of trial and error. So I tried to indent the last line or maybe outdent. There we go. And it's going to, this particular one is going to be the same. And I can only outdent so much. So one of those things to kind of consider. And here I've outdented, but the space isn't exactly the same. What I'm getting at here is if you choose this option for bullet points, and it's totally an option, you're going to have to fuss with it a little bit. So maybe we need to add our 2 spaces between the bullet point, and the text, and that might help to start to align that. This is good when you have minimal text. Maybe you have a brochure that's, front and back, and you can do those minute and specific changes. If you're doing this, again, for a 100-page book, this is going to be way too much time. So something to consider as you are designing with bullet points. How much ease do you want to have, or how much fun and fuss do you want to put up with? All right, so that's indenting, and then we looked at that outdent option to put that as a negative measurement. All right, so this last page here. So a few of us, when exporting, we have a couple options. You know what, I'll say it differently. We have a couple options when exporting a PDF from InDesign. And so I am going to change this document really quickly to a facing pages document. And we're going to take a look at exporting spreads. So document setup, facing pages. Great. So now, as if I were working on a multiple spread layout, I've got my visual here on screen that shows me the spreads, but in a PDF we can export it so we also have the spreads. We'll have page 1 hanging out all by itself, page 10 hanging out by itself, but our PDF will show these 2 pages as a single unit. So the way to do that is if we go to File and Export for our PDF options. Yes, and that's the name I want to give it. So here on this first screen under General, we can choose Spreads. And that changes it from those individual pages to the multiple page layout. The next piece of the puzzle is I wanted to just show you marks and bleeds. And this is if we are sending this file to the printer for final printing and we had bleeds, that color or a picture that spills off to the edge of the page, this helps the printer with cutting that down. So I can go ahead and choose crop marks. And there are plenty of options. I don't have to choose all of these marks. If I did, I can turn them all off and on. If I wanted bleed marks, which are a different set of crop marks, typically we don't really need to provide that with a printer. They'll let you know if they want it. Registration marks are typical when you're printing a high volume of documents. A lot of times, though, a print shop will add their own bleed marks, registration marks based on their printers. So I really only choose crop marks in this section. A printer will tell you if they need something else. So something to keep in mind there. If we do have a bleed on our document and my document has no bleeds, you can turn that on, use document settings, or choose your own dimensions for the bleed. We don't need a bleed on this document because there are no bleeds, so we're just going to take a look at those crop marks and spreads when we export it. Aha, I have text overset on page 1, that's okay. And let me go ahead and open up that document. All right, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. So there is my page 1. So this would be our cover to our slide. Oh, yes, yeah, great. We love Adobe products. Whenever there's an update, you will probably get those boxes all the time. So, so if this was our newsletter, we would have our page 1 that would hang out by itself because it really visually is only one object. Scrolling down, my page 2 and 3 are now together in a single unit based on exporting as a spread. So that's what that difference is going to be and how that looks. So let's go ahead and try exporting as spreads for our next edition. And our last page would also be hanging out on its own. So this document has the crop marks. With our newsletter, we do not need to export with crop marks. It was just something visually that I wanted you guys to see. So the printer would print out these pages on larger paper, and if you had those bleeds, it would come in and take a guillotine cutter and cut those edges off. And again, a bleed is for, if that guillotine cutter is a little off, we don't want white paper to show through, so we would design it with our picture hanging off the edge of the page or a color bar hanging off the edge of the page to that bleed space. All right, so there's some pieces of the puzzle there that we've covered for really defining and making our text look a little better on our page. So hopefully all of those help tweak our content for our next round.